Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 37 of Journey into Legends. Today we are going to be talking about the X-Wing Rogue Squadron comic series. I'm really excited to jump into these comics. Very soon we're going to be starting the X-Wing book series, so I'm excited to start with these comics as an introduction to the story and the characters. Anyways, without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, our first issue is the X-Wing Rogue Squadron Special, which is an extremely short comic released in 1995, and this one takes place on the planet Tandankin, and basically all that happens in it is that Rogue Squadron comes and defends the locals against some Imperials, and Luke makes a really cheesy speech defending Wedge against some disgruntled locals. Overall, this one is very cheesy and unnecessary, but it's also extremely short and was originally distributed by Kellogg's as a marketing deal for some cereal, so it's obviously not very representative of the entire series. And in the end, it's pretty harmless. Anyways, let's move on to our first actual arc, which is called The Rebel Opposition. Alright, for our first arc, we have issues 1 through 4 titled The Rebel Opposition, and this arc is all about Rogue Squadron going on a mission to the planet Silpar. This arc was a decent introduction to the series. I really enjoyed the characters here, Wedge, Tycho, Wes, and Diller especially, as well as some of the minor characters like Elskull and Vance. Though I enjoyed the characters, I do think the storyline here was a bit lacking. Other than a fun little side plot about Tycho infiltrating the Empire, the storyline was just your average Empire versus Rebellion battle, and the presentation was a bit confusing at times. Also, they tried to pull off a plot twist, but it ended up being so predictable and rather unsatisfying. Overall, this arc wasn't incredible, but it's a fun enough start to the series. Now let's move on to the next arc, which is called The Phantom Affair. Alright, so for our next arc, we have issues 5 through 8, titled The Phantom Affair, and in this one, Rogue Squadron goes on a mission to the planet Merlst, and there's a lot going on in this storyline. Basically, there's this guy named Falcon, who's conning the Empire with a fake cloaking device, and Wedge gets involved in a bid for this cloaking device. But on the other side of this bid is an Imperial named Loka Hask. Now, Hask is a really interesting villain. First off, his design is very cool. He's got this parasite symbiote sort of thing attached to his face, which was really weird and cool. Secondly, however, Hask was responsible for the murder of Wedge's parents, which creates a really nice rivalry between the two of them, and offered some really great backstory for Wedge. Now, another interesting aspect of this story is Falcon also uses holograms to con the people of Merlst, and one of these holograms is of a fake Jedi, which is a decent concept. However, they didn't really do much with the execution of that storyline. And that seems to be the common theme with these comics so far. There's a lot of interesting ideas, but these ideas are never really executed in a fun or interesting way. Overall, I think this arc was an improvement over the first, but again, these comics aren't great so far. The storylines are very meh, and sometimes hard to follow when there's a lot going on, and generally, I just prefer novels over comics. Anyways, let's move on to the third arc, which is called Battleground Tatooine. Alright, our third arc consists of issues 9 through 12 and is called Battleground Tatooine, and this one is easily my favorite thus far. It's always fun to return to Tatooine, and this one has some really neat aspects. First, I just think the story here was a lot more concise and easier to follow than the previous two arcs, and the familiar setting made it a lot more interesting. Secondly, the action here was much more entertaining. Whether it was the setting, the story, or the presentation, I don't really know. The dogfights, the brawls, and the shootouts were all just more thrilling and fun than before. And finally, there is a little minor Tatooine-associated character that pops up in this, which I found really, really cool, and that was Bib Fortuna after he became a spider droid, which happened in Tales from Jabba's Palace. His inclusion here was a really, really neat tie-in to that book, and him body-swapping with Furith Olan was a really fun way to end his character. My only complaint about this arc is that the characters from Rogue Squadron didn't get as much development here. Last arc explored Wedge's backstory, and a lot happened with Elskull concerning her husband and the death of Groznik, etc. And side characters like Diller, Wes, Hobby, and Plur felt a lot less involved in this story, and I just felt that in this arc, not much was done to further the characters besides some big development for Tycho and Winter's romance. But overall, despite that, this arc was a lot of fun and a big improvement over the first two. Let's move on to our next arc, which is called The Warrior Princess. Alright, so for our next arc, we have issues 13 through 16, which is called The Warrior Princess, and this arc was fantastic. Basically, the arc deals with Plur and her backstory, as well as her home planet of Iatu, which is on the verge of falling apart due to a civil war between two groups. There's the Preamsta, and then there's the People's Liberation Battalion. And this civil war plotline was really interesting, and had some really neat twists and turns. But easily my favorite part of the arc is the character of Plur, who is one of the less interesting members of Rogue Squadron to me, but this arc just made me fall in love with her character. Her backstory is extremely interesting and surprisingly dark, and her storyline in this was just so great. Overall, this is easily my favorite arc thus far. But anyways, let's move on to the Rogue Squadron one-shot. Alright, so we have a quick little break from the main series here with a one-shot issue that's set just prior to the Battle of Yavin. Basically, Rogue Squadron meets with a contact who provides them with a bunch of astromech droids, and in the process of smuggling them off planet, they lose one of their pilots. But luckily, when they get back to Yavin 4, they're introduced to a new replacement pilot named Luke Skywalker. Overall, this issue was fine. I really liked how they introduced Luke at the end, and I liked getting a glimpse of a completely different Rogue Squadron starring characters like Biggs and Porkins. Anyways, let's move on to the next arc, which is called Requiem for a Rogue. Alright, for our next arc, we have issues 17 through 20, which is called Requiem for a Rogue, and this one was another really great arc. Basically, this one starts with Rogue Squadron following the trail of a missing Bothan tourist ship, which leads them to the planet of Malrev 4. While there, they get attacked by some TIE fighters, they find the Bothans, and are ambushed by some native beasts called Urukeen. Now, these Urukeen beasts are actually being controlled by a Deveronian named Kartarian using Sith magic. Eventually, Rogue Squadron stops the threats, but not without losing a few of their own. That's right, both Delur Nep and Hirian Inger are killed at the end of this arc, and while I wasn't the biggest fan of their characters, I thought their sacrifice was done really well, and I was still saddened by their deaths. Another thing I really liked about this arc was the planet of Malrev 4. First off, I really like jungle planets in Star Wars, and this one was no exception. The way that the planet interacts with the Sith magic was also a unique and interesting aspect of the planet. But speaking of the Sith magic, that part of the story felt really out of place here. I'm completely fine with Sith magic in the right context. It works in something like Tales of the Jedi, but it doesn't really fit the tone of something like Rogue Squadron. But anyways, I really enjoyed the arc nonetheless, and let's move on to the next one, which is called In the Empire's Service. Alright, our next arc consists of issues 21 to 24, and this one is called In the Empire's Service. And this one is all about the fight for Brental 4. I wasn't the biggest fan of this arc's story, as it mainly just dealt with Imperial politics and more dogfights. Brental 4 isn't a very interesting planet to me, and this arc introduced and focused on some rookie pilots that I just really don't care for. However, there is one very big positive about this arc, and that is that there are some very big character introductions here. First, we have Yasan Isard, which is a very important villain in the X-Wing book series, which we'll be reading next. Secondly, we have Sate Pestage, who is a minor character from Return of the Jedi. And finally, we have Baron Fel, who is my personal favorite of the new characters, and luckily, the very next issue is all about Baron Fel. So overall, this was a good storyline, but mainly because of what it introduces for the upcoming storylines. Anyways, let's move on to the making of Baron Fel. Alright, now we have issue 25, The Making of Baron Fel, and this issue is probably my favorite of the entire series so far. After the events of the last arc, Baron Fel has been captured by Rogue Squadron, and while he's being debriefed, we get flashbacks of his entire life, beginning with his upbringing on Corellia, his entire career as an Imperial pilot and instructor, his marriage to Wedge's sister, leading up to his capture on Brental 4. And this issue was just so much fun. I'm loving the character of Baron Fel, and his relationship with his wife and his ties to Wedge and the other members of Rogue Squadron makes him a really intriguing villain, especially because he's not evil. He's just very loyal to the Empire. Anyways, the issue ends with him offering himself and all of his knowledge to the rebels if they help him find his wife, Wedge's sister, which is what I'm assuming will be our next arc, which is called Family Ties. Alright, so our next storyline is only 2 issues, issues 26 and 27, and it's called Family Ties. And in this one, Wes, Plur, and Hobby go on a mission to Corellia in hopes of finding and rescuing Baron Fell's wife as part of the deal that I talked about earlier in issue 25. While on Corellia, the pilots get caught up in a kidnapping plot involving Baron Fell's nephew, Fyric Fell. Overall, this was one of my least favorite arcs so far. The sort of ransom plot that was being told here has been done countless times, and the absence of characters like Wedge and Soontir made this one less interesting than it could have been. However, there is an interesting character introduction in this arc, and that is a member of Corellian security named Corran Horn. Now, Corran will, of course, be a major character in the X-Wing novels, and will eventually read his standalone novel, I, Jedi. But this arc is actually my introduction to the character, and so far, he's nothing too special, but it's easy to see that he's a natural fit for Rogue Squadron, so I'm excited to see more of his character later down the line. But anyways, let's move on to the penultimate arc, Masquerade. Alright, for our second to last arc, we have issues 28 to 31 titled Masquerade, and this one was really fun. Basically, in this one, Han and Baron Fell accompany Leia to Iatu for some political stuff, but it's all a feint, because Winter is actually posing as Leia so that the real Leia and Wedge can meet with Sape Pestage about him possibly defecting to the Rebel Alliance. And again, I really enjoyed this arc. First off, bringing in Han and Leia in such a crucial role was a lot of fun, and pairing Han with Baron Fell was just so entertaining. Baron Fell being an actual member of the New Republic and Rogue Squadron was very satisfying and a lot of fun. And secondly, Tycho and Winter's relationship gets a lot of development here, and it's really well done. Overall, this is easily one of my favorite arcs from the series, but anyways, let's finish it off with the final arc titled Mandatory Retirement. Alright, that's it, ladies and gentlemen, the final arc of X-Wing Rogue Squadron, issues 32 to 35, titled Mandatory Retirement, and this one was a great finale to the series. Basically, this whole arc is about Rogue Squadron rescuing Sape Pestage from the Empire's grasp, because of course he's switching sides and he's a valuable asset to the New Republic. Now, this arc had some really fun, really grand action, which gave it that grand finale feel to it, which I really liked. But the big problem I have with this arc is that in the end, the Empire still gets Pestage and kills him anyway, so the whole mission, which cost lives by the way, was for naught. Other than that, however, this was a suitable, action-packed finale to the series. Alright, so overall, I really enjoyed these comics. I really enjoyed the stories being told here, the art was great, and the characters especially were really interesting. Although I do think it took some time to get going, everything after those first few arcs was fantastic. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed my review. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll be starting the X-Wing novels. See ya.